And this one's a fun little solo game where you're going to be growing succulents in a jar, but unfortunately for you, there is also a little critter in there nibbling away at your plants and potentially costing you victory points at the end of the game. The game offers a few different critters of variable difficulty, and you're going to be picking one of those to play for each game. And then there are a bunch of different succulent and jar cards that can grant you with special abilities. You're going to be taking advantage of those to try and grow as many succulents as possible. And I do want to thank the publisher here because they were kind enough to send me a prototype copy of the game. So rather than just explaining how this game plays, I can actually go ahead and show you. I'm going to be playing with the snail here, which is the second easiest critter to play with, and the reason I chose the snail is because the fly does not deal any damage, and I did want to show you how that mechanism actually works. The critter starts on the leftmost side of your jar, and then each turn it's going to be moving one space forward until it eventually reaches the end of your jar, and once it can't move any further, that's going to be triggering the end of the game. Like I said, you're going to be trying to grow as many succulents as possible because each one's going to be worth a victory point, but it can be worth 2 victory points if it's in as best health as possible. The way that you grow a succulent is with these different plant cards located in the center here. At the start of the game, these are all going to be face down on the soil side, and if you're able to meet the requirements in the center of the card, you're going to be flipping that over, indicating that that succulent has been grown. The health of the succulent is actually indicated by the row that it's in, and there's actually 3 different rows here, and they all start in the center. But if you're able to move this to the top, then that's going to be the healthiest state, making it worth 2 points. But if it's in either the center or the bottom, then it's only going to be worth 1 point. Succulents can't get any more damaged if they are on the bottom row, so you don't have to worry about losing them. It just makes them a little bit more harder to get them to the top. In order to meet a requirement of a card, you just have to get those 3 icons adjacent to each other across 3 neighboring cards, anywhere within the row as long as it isn't divided by the critter. You might have noticed that there's icons on the top and bottom of these cards, and in order for those to be considered adjacent to each other, they do need to be on the same row. So for example, these 2 blue cubes would currently be considered adjacent to each other, but if I were to slide this up, those would no longer be adjacent, and instead this lightning bolt would be adjacent to this cube. There's also a special ability on these cards as well as some icons which are grayed out, and that's just letting you know what is on the other side of this card, because if I were able to flip this card, these grayed out icons now become available, and you can see that because they're colored in here, and then the special ability instantly gets activated. These 6 jar cards on either end here are not just here for looks, because these can actually grant you with additional actions after the game is ended, giving you even more opportunities to score victory points, and the way that you take advantage of those is by trying to flip cards adjacent to them, because if I was able to flip this card to its succulent side while it's adjacent to a jar card, then the jar card is also going to flip to its lit up side, indicating that I do get to take an extra move at the end of the game. This means that throughout the game I'm going to be trying to manipulate these to get other cards adjacent to the jars that I haven't flipped yet in order to flip those over and get those extra actions as well. The way a turn works is all outlined on the critter card, and it says here that I get to take 2 actions, and my options are to slide a card up or down, or to shift a card to the right any amount of spaces, so long as it doesn't pass the critter card. If I meet the requirements of any of the succulents, I can then flip them over, resolving their effects, and then the critter is going to cause damage to the closest plant on the right side of this card, and the way that that's indicated is by sliding that card down, and then the critter is just going to move 1 space to the right and then flip over. The neat thing about this is that it does slightly alter the turn depending on which way that the snail is facing. So I think we're all good to just jump into the game now, and I'm going to be taking my 2 actions, but before we do that, I did want to point out that I did notice we were lucky enough to get these 2 blue cube icons side by side, and the third one is located down here, so if we're able to get these all adjacent to each other, that will actually allow us to meet the requirement of this card way over here, so I think that's what we're going to try to do, and we are able to do that with the 2 actions that we have. For my first action, I'm going to be sliding this card to the right into a new column, and we do have a few options here. I can either put it to the left of the other 2 icons, in between them, or on the right of them. Either option will work, but because this one also has a water icon on it, I probably want to try and get this beside another water icon because that'll help us meet this requirement later. And there is an icon in this card here, so I think I'm going to be sliding this one into this column. And that was just our first action, so we still do have one left. And for that, I'm going to be sliding this card upward into the topmost row because that's going to get these 3 icons adjacent to each other, which now meets the requirement of this card, so we can just go ahead and flip that one over. And that's going to be instantly activating this card's special ability, and we have to activate it. We don't have a choice, but it says to shift one plant to a different column on the same side of the critter, and then place it in the topmost row. And I think the card I'm going to pick for that is this one here that we looked at before, because I do plan to flip this one very soon since we already do have some water icons lined up. And I wouldn't mind sliding this one all the way to the right here and to the top, because if we're able to flip this one while it's adjacent to this jar card, that's going to allow us to flip this jar card to its opposite side, granting us with extra actions at the end of the game. So that's going to slide all of these cards over, and then we're just going to be following exactly what it says on this critter card. We have to damage the closest plant on the right, which is going to send this one down, and then we're going to shift this one right and flip it to the other side. And I'm realizing now that I probably could have been a little bit more efficient with my actions here, but that's okay, we'll just roll with it. And lucky for me, because the snail has flipped to its other side, that actually changes the actions that I have available to me. And rather than sliding any card to a new column to its right, I can now slide any card to its left. So I think what I'm going to do is take this card and slide it over here. And then I'm going to do something a little unexpected here and slide this card up, which actually gets these three lightning bolts adjacent to each other, which meets the requirement of this card. So this card's going to be flipping over to its succulent side. And this forces us to use that ability, which says to swap the two edge plants and then place one in the top row and one in the bottom row. So let's go ahead and do that and flip these two cards, and I think I'm going to put this one in the top row and this one in the bottom. And the reason I chose to do it that way is because the snail's now going to be damaging the closest plant on its left-hand side, and since plants in the lowest row can no longer be damaged, this actually is going to be doing nothing for the snail, so it's just going to be shifting one right and then flipping over to its other side. And for my two actions, I'm going to be doing something a little controversial here and bringing this card back down, but then I'm going to be sliding this card up. This gets us our three water icons adjacent to each other, which is going to meet the requirements of this card, which flips that over, which is then going to be flipping this jar card over. And as I mentioned, that's really nice for us because this is going to give us an extra action at the end of the game. But now we have to go ahead and perform the special ability of this card, which says to swap two plants in the same row. For that, I think I'm going to go ahead and swap these two, which I will explain in a moment here. But before I do that, the snail's going to deal 1 damage to the closest card on its right, so that'll slide down. Then it's going to be shifting 1 space over and flipping to its other side. Now we can continue with my master plan here, which is to use an action to slide this card up and our other action to slide this card down, which gets these 3 mountain icons adjacent to each other. This is going to allow us to flip this card over to its other side, which is going to force this ability, which says to swap 2 neighboring plants and then place both in the middle row. And for cards to be neighboring, they don't need to be in the same row, they just need to be in neighboring columns, but in this case they are in the same row because I'm going to swap these 2 cards, which I'm doing basically just to get them both moved down, because I want to get these 3 icons lined up in my next turn. But now the snail is going to damage the closest plant to its left, and in this case that plant is already on the bottom, so it can't be damaged. But when this happens, it's actually going to be looking at the next card over, which can be damaged, so this one is going to be sliding down, and then this is going to be flipping over to its other side. And I was going to slide this card up in order to get these 3 icons adjacent to each other, but I have had a bit of a change of heart here, and I think what I'm going to do instead is slide this card up. And the reason that I want to do this is because this snail is now going to damage this card, which is going to slide it down, and then these are going to swap, and then the snail is going to flip over to its other side. And this automatically puts these 3 icons in order for us, which is going to be resolving this card, which will then allow us to flip it over, including this jar card here. That's not going to happen until I first take my 2 actions, which are optional to take, but I will definitely be taking them. And I think I'm going to use those to push this card up twice into the healthiest position, assuming that I will be able to flip this over to its succulent side before the end of the game, which I am definitely able to do because I do have a ace up my sleeve here, because now that I've taken my 2 actions, we can then resolve these 3 icons, which we have in a row here, and this allows us to flip this card over, which also flips over this jar card, which is really nice for us. But now we have to activate the special ability here, which says swap 2 plants in different rows, exchanging their exact positions. And this is where I'm going to get really cheeky because I'm going to be swapping this card with the card that we just flipped, because this card has a plant icon on the bottom of it, which now gets these 3 icons in a row, which is exactly what we need in order to flip this card over. So let's go ahead and do that, which also flips over this jar card. And now we have to perform this special ability, which says swap 1 edge plant with 1 non-edge plant. And I think I'm going to go ahead and use that to swap these 2 cards, which unfortunately our snail is now going to damage, but then it's going to be flipping over here and flipping to its other side. But for my next action, I'm going to slide these 2 cards back up, which gets these 3 icons in a row, which is now going to be flipping this card. And that allows us to shift any card to any other column and put it in any row in that column. So I'm going to slide this one over here. Then the snail is going to damage this card, move over, and flip over to the other side. For our 2 actions, we'll slide this one up twice, which gets those 3 icons in a row, which is going to allow us to flip this card. This is going to allow us to swap any 2 neighboring plants and then place them in any row, which is great for us. We can just go ahead and swap these 2 and then place them both in the top row, because that's going to make them both worth 2 victory points at the end of the game. But now the snail is going to damage this plant, slide over, and flip over to the other direction. For our 2 actions, I'll slide this one up, and then I will slide this one up. And now the snail wants to move forward, which it can no longer do, so that's going to be triggering the end of the game. But before we tally up the score here, we do have a few free actions from the different jar cards that we were able to flip throughout the game. And that's really nice for us because each one of these is going to allow us to slide a card up or down, and we have 3 of them, which means that I have 3 free movements to go 1, 2, and 3. And that is how you max out the score in this game, because I just got the highest score, which makes me a master gardener. But like I said, I did play with the second easiest critter, and there are much more difficult ones to play with here. But that's how you play the glass garden, and I had a lot of fun with this one, and I really do love the artwork and the theme here as well, so that definitely gives it some extra points in my book. If you enjoyed the little run through here, and this looks like a game that you might be interested in as well, I do have a link to the campaign in the description down below, and of course you can click to get notified.